It's a big, scary world out there, but that's never stopped us from some additional big screen thrill seeking. While some movies are scarier than the sum of their parts, we're getting a little more granular with this list. These are our picks for the 10 scariest movie moments of all time. Right off the bat, I need to make clear my belief that no moment exists in a vacuum. Every moment is the product of the context laid down before it and the consequences that follow it. This might be doubly true for scary moments. A good scare needs the ingredients arranged correctly in front of it, the tension built, and a great scare will linger after it's left the screen. And just so we're on the same page from the jump here, I'm not talking exclusively about horror movies either. Admittedly, most of this list will be made up of that spookiest of genres. But a truly scary movie moment can creep up out of a dramatic chamber piece just as easily as it can in the middle of Slasherpalooza 7, The Bloodbathtening. Sometimes more so. So, for each of our taxonomic breakdowns of individual scares on film, I want to focus on at least one that's from a not traditionally considered horror film. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about scaring the shit out of an audience with the old reliable jump scare. Ah! Jesus. Ew, I think that was louder than usual. The first thing we need to talk about where scary moments are concerned is the shortest of all scary moments, the jump scare. Built on an instantaneous release of tension, the jump scare is maybe the purest example of setup and payoff that cinema has to offer. You can go back 100 years to find a good jump scare in The Phantom of the Opera, or maybe even the original horror movie, That Train that people thought would run them over in the theater. There's a beautiful simplicity to these that, when executed properly, give a dose of the unexpected just when you're starting to think the coast is clear. Some more recent favorites are The Boy in the Attic in Wreck, panning around almost 360 degrees. Oh, fuck that kid. God damn it. There's the lawnmower scene in Sinister, making us quietly wait until... God! Oh, what? There's the famous Texas switch of Shock, luring us in with the kid running to... Guy! He turned into a different guy! Ugh. Where non-horror movies are concerned, though, the old reliable jump scare is standing by to cash in a bit of tension between a mayor and a good cop. Jesus. Or a jewelry-crazed uncle and his reluctantly adventurous nephew. But my favorite types of jump scares don't turn the screws with tension, but with safety. Quick personal aside, my daughter, who was 8 at the time, and I were watching The Lost World, and because I'm very likely a pretty lame dad, I prefaced the hell out of the movie so she wouldn't be scared. But during the escape from the Raptors sequence, when Julianne Moore checks under the shed to be sure the coast is clear, only to find out shortly thereafter that no, the coast was very much not clear, I explained the nature of that particular jump scare in a way that I'm sure ruined movies for my poor kid. First of all, we're in the middle of a tense scene as it is. This particular moment is a little bit of a chance to catch our breath, with at least a wall between us and the carnivores. We're presented with the means of another escape, digging under the wall. We watch as she checks underneath it, confirming that it's a safe space. The camera pans away from it quickly, and that is the key. We take our eyes off the safe space for a split second, only to find when we pan back to it, jump scare! Safety and respite are briefly teased before being pulled out from under us like our faith in man's ability to respect the limits of creation. A few days later, I overheard my daughter explaining jump scares in her own words to her cousin, and I've honestly never been more proud. But the point here is, jump scares are a foundational, cleanly simple place to start our thoughts about what makes a movie moment well and truly scary. The pattern of tension plus momentary safety plus rug pull can be found in another Spielberg gem, and our number 10 pick, Ben Gardner's boat from Jaws. What's great about this scene is the lengths taken to establish a sense of relative safety in a nighttime swim to investigate the hull of the well-known fisherman's boat. Some of it is even rooted in character. We're still getting to know Richard Dreyfuss's Matt Hooper, but his expertise has been completely established in the moments leading up to the moment. We know he's smart and respectful of the shark terrorizing Amity Island, but here we also see his capability. He's got gadgets aplenty on his boat, the backing of the film's primary hero, and a confidence that we get to share as he dives in. We also know that there is for sure a shark out there. The tension looms just under the surface, as it does for the rest of the film, and the famously camera-shy antagonist. But Spielberg's greatest misdirect with this scene is the tooth. Finding a massive great white tooth lodged in the hull is frightening enough. Surely, we think, that's what this scene has in store for us. The first visual proof of the scale of the problem. But nope! Just when we think the scene is done with us, poor Ben Gardner's head pops up to say hi. First of all, anything jumping out at us in this moment makes for a good jump scare, but it's not the shark we were afraid of when we first jumped into the water, which accomplishes a few things besides just the scare. Most importantly, it maintains Hooper's credibility. Had he confidently dove into the water and come face to face with the shark, he'd look pretty stupid for the rest of the film, and we can't have that. But structurally, in the narrative of the movie, it had been a solid 20 minutes since the last Jaws sighting, and it'll be another 10 or 12 before the next attack. We needed this tension and this scare to keep us on the edge of our seats between the more traditionally scary moments. So on top of the way this jump scare is executed, it's a jolt of adrenaline to the audience at a spot in the runtime that really needed it, and the movie on the whole is better for it. Moving on from the jump scare, the monster that takes you by surprise, the natural place to go next is to the scare that you see coming. These are the slow burn scares. The ones that sneak up on you even though they've been slowly walking your way this whole time. Just like It following in the background. Or each time a girl walks home alone at night. These are films filled with moments of creeping dread. Moments like a column silhouette turning to face us in the night house, or the cell phone footage discovered in Lake Mungo are slow-moving terrorizers that you can't look away from. For a non-horror movie, think also about the critical scene on the highway at night during Nocturnal Animals, and how the result of the encounter was so clear the entire time it was working its way towards the screen. The best of these, by their very nature, take a while to organize. Slow burn. Slow is literally half the description, and to distill them down to a moment must also include the long build-up. The best of these, to risk a cop-out at number 9, take the whole movie, and few have done it as well as 1973's The Wicker Man.
The sacrifice was a human being. Rowan's not dead. Sometimes the victim would be drowned in the sea or burnt to death in a huge sacrificial bonfire. Sometimes the 6 swordsmen ritually beheaded the Virgin. Dear God in heaven, even these people can't be that mad.
The Wicker Man is such a fun folk horror film, it's a little hard to watch it now without having at least a notion of how it's going to play out. It's been homaged, imitated, and literally remade enough that even if you've never seen it, you know it.
No, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
And that's why I really want to highlight this movie here, even more than the craft of the film. The moment when Sergeant Howie realizes his doom is imminent is only just a few moments from the end. But it's a result of the entire film worth of build-up. The paganism of the island is something he's known about for this entire stay, something he's seen coming with every quirky Summer Isle inhabitant he encounters, something they've been honest with him about since Christopher Lee's charming Lord Summer Isle told him about at their first meeting. And for us in the audience, this setup and execution are as familiar a trope as you could ask for, but it's important to remember it's familiar because The Wicker Man did it so well. The movie is a cult favorite for a reason, and it's all clear in these final moments before desperation sets in with the policeman. He thinks he's done his job, but the rug is pulled out from under him just as quickly. Set on a cliff overlooking the ocean, he's trapped between crashing waves and the calm matter-of-factness of the cult that's about to sacrifice him to their pagan gods. The same energy they've had the entire movie, but now it means his death. This is the only end that Howie was ever meant for. It was deliberately plotted and slowly revealed for the entire runtime of the film, leaving us in the helpless shoes of a doomed man. To elicit any emotion on screen at the intersection of all the trades required to make a movie work, of course these scary movie moments need to have their nuts and bolts in order. And because we're nothing if not big ol' marks for filmcraft here on this channel, let's start breaking down some moments based on the individual parts, starting with the visuals. These are the moments that just look scary. There are films that lean on production design like The Pale Man's Dinner Table in Pan's Labyrinth, or venturing through the inner workings of a madman in The Cell, or any of Tarsim's work for that matter. Quick aside here so I can vote for stop motion as the preeminent vehicle for imagery that's scary outside of all context because of films like The Wolf House, made in the stop motion equivalent of a single take and created entirely out of duct tape. or animation pioneer Phil Tippett's magnum opus Mad God. But to be honest, terrifying visuals really sing loudest and most disturbingly in non-horror movies. More than any other category we'll talk about here, a scary visual can really pop in a film where you might not be expecting it. This is where the term Lynchian really comes in handy, as nearly all of the late auteur's work qualifies as not really horror, but scary as hell anyway. From a truly bizarre attempt at cutting a chicken to Dean Stockwell karaoke and beyond. For me though, when I think of scary on the look alone, I always go back to the cook, the thief, his wife, and her lover.
There you are in charge now. Leave that now and come and see what I've got you, eh? I've brought you a present. Well, this is our anniversary. 3 months of mutual understanding, eh, Richard? 3 months since I first invited you to be my favourite restaurateur.
Peter Greenaway's 1989 film is, on paper at least, fairly straightforward. An obnoxious and powerful criminal strong-arms his way into a partnership with a gourmet chef, while the crook's wife falls for a bookish regular at the restaurant. It's right there in the title. However, the presentation of that story is anything but straightforward. Certainly not anything that would immediately fall into the scary movie bucket. But the entire runtime of the film is otherworldly. And because I won't be trying any highfalutin video essay nonsense and calling the whole movie a moment, I want to focus on the first tracking shot through the back of house at the restaurant. Not the first shot of the film, but for sure still the opening, this tracking shot establishes something truly unsettling. There's a formality to these proceedings, an artifice that is so front and center it's impossible not to notice. Not to think, what the hell is about to happen here? From the eerie falsetto of a young boy singing, lost in his own thoughts, through the bullying buffoonery of Michael Gambon's Spica, the quiet resignation of the cook, very aware of the trap he's in, with instinct enough to pick his rebellious spots, the smoke, the dark and damp back alley vibes, the duck feathers floating through the air like a gentle snow, all filmed in a slow and steady tracking shot. This is a shot that so thoroughly establishes the tone of the film as something almost paranormal. This is a staged morality play, a classical tragedy about to unfold in a dark and dangerous world in which nothing good can last, and to happen so early in the film makes the moment all the more unsettling. Let's stick with craft for another couple of picks here and look at audio. These are the moments of terror that succeed in their scares chiefly through their use of sound. There are whole movies, of course, built on the idea of being quiet in order to survive, A Quiet Place being the most recent and fully committed of those examples. Sometimes there's a familiar clicking of an alien predator to build tension, or tripping over a pet's water bowl after a long stretch of silence to break the tension. This sequence from Invisible Man is incredibly shrewd, pinning our hero's hopes for escape on her ability to stealthily get out of the house. Sometimes it's just a loud noise that jumpstarts our character back into reality, like the bus stopping suddenly in Cat People. And this is the style of sound-based scares most often found in the non-horror fare. Think of the sequence from Ikiru that Darren Aronofsky later borrowed for The Fountain. With the sudden intrusion of sound from the world around the isolated characters waking all of us back up. We Need to Talk About Kevin also deserves a non-horror mention for the truly awful sound of the titular Kevin biting his fingernails that adds a disturbing aura to the entire scene. And, to invoke David Lynch again, the sound design attached to the old woman in Mulholland Drive. A moment that rightfully belongs in the jump scare category, but I think it's absolutely sold on the strength of that haunting sound. But scary sounds, I believe, are best in scary movies, when a single spike in the waveform can send shivers down your spine in a sea of other scary moments. For this, we look to moments like The Conjuring's game of hide and clap, with one last solitary clap coming at us from the dark. This moment is built off the sound design of the previous few minutes, with creaks and whispers originating from the dark corners of the house, and while it is undoubtedly effective for a moment based entirely off the sound, our number 7 pick goes to the clucking from Hereditary. By the time we get to the clucking, we know exactly what this sound is, what it means, where it comes from. It's an involuntary tick, something Charlie does that's quite literally out of her control. It's something that, on a narrative level, implies the presence of a demon, but on an emotional level, it's a reminder for Toni Collette's Annie of the pain and grief that comes with loss. And this tongue click in an empty car is the perfect deployment of a single sound scare. What makes Hereditary great, what makes any movie truly great, I feel, is a connection to the characters. Things sneaking up on you either visually or auditorially will always give you a jolt, but things sneaking up on your emotions can do you one better. Here's a moment where a mother is grieving, where disturbing mysteries about her family are coming to light, and she is at her breaking point. Something we can all empathize with. This sound, this piece of her daughter from the past, is a terrifying straw on a camel's back that's all but broken. It's a trap that had been laid close to an hour earlier, creating a heartbreaking moment that's also a terrifying jump scare. Combining picture and sound is kind of the literal definition of editing. So, for our number 6 spot, following our audio and visual cues, we may as well look at editing as well. Of course, every scary moment on this list to some degree works based on the edit, but think about our last pick. That quick cut to the back seat certainly helps, but it's not why it's such an impactful moment. But editing does a lot of different things and looks a little different for each moment. Now, it's important to remember that there are entire documentaries about the editing in Psycho's shower scene, so right off the bat I can tell you I'm not going to waste your time by talking about it more here. But looking for other scares that are truly pulled off via the edit, we can first look at a wild montage like the ending of Don't Look Now, rapid firing through a panicked set of images. This is also where my non-horror examples would live, in the final moments of the still very horrific Come and See, flashing back within our protagonist's imagination to find Hitler as a child. But flashy quick cuts are not the only way to show off an edit. Sometimes the magic lives in not cutting. The Exorcist 3's famous hallway scene is as great a jump scare as has ever been put on film, but it's achieved through the incredibly long "what is it I'm supposed to be looking at" shot that builds the tension. When we look at editing, we also have to think about juxtaposition. And where on-screen scares are concerned, I always think about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for this, with hard and fast cuts away from the gruesome to something peaceful. There's also the narrative function of images on screen to consider, like Jordan Peele's cutting back to the sitcom tragedy in Nope before we know its significance. But for just pure editing, the brilliant combination of images and sound to tell a story, I'd really like to talk about Hélène Catet and Bruno Forzani's neo-giallo slasher, Amer. On first blush, this is a largely visual movie you might think doesn't belong in this category, but really it's not, and it does. Sure, its primary language is French, but you really don't need the subtitles. It's a luscious, erotic, and violent collection of close-ups coupled with the creaking of leather, the slice of a blade as gravel crunches beneath heavy boots. The film is a collection of image and sound assembled in such a tight, breathless way that still manages to convey space and time and character in spite of being assembled almost entirely of insert shots. But one moment in particular, at the end of a midnight cat and mouse chase through an Italian villa, a sudden burst of violence erupts as a stylized attack. A long stretch of quietly breathless sneaking in blue-hued day for night is suddenly over with a series of swooshing stabs and gasps. This moment leads to an even more drawn-out, methodically torturous death filmed in quick inserts and a raw, animalistic sound design that makes you squirm. Amer takes everything Giallo was known for and squeezes it with a black leather glove and makes it all sing through the edit. If the film weren't cut so expertly, moments like this would be a nonsensical collection of inserts and sound effects. Instead, it's a sequence worth studying for its ability to convey so much fear and anxiety and discomfort with such minimal imagery. For the second half of our list, let's move away from strictly craft-based categories and get into some psychological stuff. To start with, I want to look at real fears, movies that very deliberately tap into well-known phobias. These can show up in the subject matter easily enough, with very little to do with the actual craft of filmmaking. You scared of big dogs? Maybe Cujo is going to give you nightmares. Scared of nightmares? Well, Freddy Krueger's got a pun for that, I'm sure. Some of our favorite scary stories to tell around the CineFix campfire, though, are moments of claustrophobia, like the tight underground tunnels of The Descent, or the tight underwater tunnels of Underwater. Both of those films feature killer monsters, but perhaps their most squirm-worthy moments trade on that all-too-common fear of enclosed spaces. There's the opposite, agoraphobia, that Hitchcock plays with famously in North by Northwest. There's just straight-up getting hopelessly lost in the woods, like in the Blair Witch Project. And then there's the old reliable, scared of the dark. Every movie I've mentioned here also features a sequence in which darkness holds a significant danger. There's something lurking in the shadows just beyond the light. But the cleverest twist on this timeless fear shows up in the basement of a serial killer with night vision goggles in The Silence of the Lambs. At this point in The Silence of the Lambs, we know how much danger Jodie Foster's Clarice is in. She's been a step ahead of her boss for most of the film, and by the time she tracks down James Gumb, discovers he's actually Buffalo Bill, and has to chase him into his basement/dungeon/fashion studio, we've already visited the space on a few occasions in the runtime. For us, out here in the audience, there's no mystery as to what's down there. So how does Jonathan Demme escalate a terrifying Act 3 set piece in a familiar location? He turns out the lights. But instead of letting us fester in our collective fear of moments like this, we get to see the scenario from the perspective of the thing we're afraid of. We're looking on as Clarice, eyes wide, pupils dilated and begging for light, stumbling through the basement, groping at the walls, through Buffalo Bill's eyes. We see how easy it would be for him to reach out and kill our hero, how he's toying with the idea of doing just that. The effect is not a jolt of adrenaline like something jumping out at you from the dark. Instead, the first-person perspective confirms what we've always been afraid of, that there is something in the dark waiting to do us harm, and this moment is all the more terrifying for it. Ping-ponging away from the well-known phobias, we need to also look at the type of fear that's not quite so easy to put your finger on. This is the realm of the existential. When a film presents you with an image that asks you to question your very nature, for me, I find myself simplifying that down to, what is this terrifying nonsense? Jacob's Ladder has 1,000 great moments like this. Ken Russell's work generally falls into this category for me as well, with Altered States and The Devils being a pair of fascinating films. Nicholas Winding Refn's Valhalla Rising doesn't quite qualify as a traditional horror film, but the simple on the surface rock stacking sequence is one of the more disturbing moments of that entire film. While I must yet again invoke David Lynch's particularly unsettling tone in, it's everywhere. Just pick a shot. Throw a dart at David Lynch's filmography. You'll find one. And does Mandy count as a horror movie? I think it does, but it also certainly counts as 3 or 4 other kinds of movies at minimum, including a drug-fueled cult trip into the heart of madness and revenge that peeks past the curtain of humanity and into the dark places beyond. But it's hard not to pick an oldie but a goodie, and a moment from a movie that likely could have or should have been used in all of these categories if I weren't saving it to talk about this specific moment, the bearsuit guy from The Shining. 2 hours and change into the runtime of this much dissected horror classic, Stanley Kubrick has us sprinting to the finish. Jack is axe-wielding his way toward Danny, while Wendy is frantically trying to secure her son's safety. It's chaos. Utter insanity-inducing chaos, particularly when compared to the rest of the movie's relatively measured pace. But then, Wendy tops another set of stairs to find a man in an assless bear suit performing a sex act on a man in a tux who pops up to make eye contact with an inscrutable look on his face. The moment, especially the first time you see it, fits so perfectly into my "what is this terrifying nonsense" definition, it's almost like I reverse engineered this entire category. Ink has been spilled for literal decades about its meaning, about its metaphorical significance, and every theory out there has merit, which is what makes this moment so great. On the surface, it's a truly bizarre image couched in a sequence of increasing terror. Wendy's husband is trying to kill her and her son. She can't find him anywhere. The hotel is understood to be haunted as shit at this point in the film, and then she stumbles on this remarkably upsetting scene. While that's a specific set of circumstances not many of us have found ourselves in, the Rorschachness of it, the ability to read your own flavor of horror into it, speaks to how existentially terrifying this scene can be. And a pretty good reason why I saved it for this spot. Getting into the final third of our list, we have to pay a visit to that specific subgenre responsible for as many scary movie moments as anything else: body horror. The shock and grotesquerie of seeing the human body pushed past its limits creates images that can, in a snap, terrify our most inner caveman brains. There's a Mount Rushmore of body horror that's actually pretty easy to rattle off, from the chest chomper from The Thing to the spiderhead from The Thing to the, most of The Thing could be our pick here. Ditto for Jeff Goldblum's gradual evolution into Brundlefly, or the tape deck tummy of Videodrome that put David Cronenberg in the All-Timers Club. An American Werewolf in London's transformation scene is carved into the side of a mountain as well, so of course, I'm not going to speak more about any of those here. There are great, shocking, violent moments of disfigurement in films like Green Room, when an arm gets stuck on the wrong side of a door, or in Midsommar during the suicide jump, or the Hooks dance sequence in Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria remake. All incredibly disturbing and very sudden. But there's a quieter side of body horror. Think about Black Swan, which perfectly toes the line between scary movie that's not a horror film and just straight up a horror film, while following the slow descent of a ballerina into something else entirely. This, I would argue, is also Nightcrawler, digging into the depths to which ambition will drive and warp somebody mentally. For our number 3 spot, though, there are 2 movies I love for the body horror's subtler side: The Skin I Live In and Eyes Without a Face. These films, about renowned surgeons performing experimental surgeries at home, about an urge to right a wrong with yet more wrong, are not related. That's to say, The Skin I Live In is not technically a remake of Eyes Without a Face, but I've always found the films to be fascinating companions. One, a man seeking a new face for his daughter, who'd been disfigured in a car accident. The other, a man seeking revenge on the young man who raped his daughter. Both Pedro Almodovar's 2011 film and George Franju's film from 1960 feature a clinical approach to body modification. The doctors have so fully committed to the reason they're doing these things, the why of it all, that there's no questioning their actions, and it's most evident in the quieter moments. It's the simple and straightforward way the doctor and his wife drug their victim. It's the casual normalcy with which Dr. Ledgard examines the progress of his work. Above all, it's the comfort with which they go about it, with no regard to being caught or exposed. These films don't shock with gore or sudden snapping of bones. These films look at incredibly intelligent and skilled people with real and relatable motivations, doing horrible things to their victims without thinking twice. If body horror is about blowing past the limits of what the human body should be able to do, to make you squirm while watching it, The Skin I Live In and Eyes Without a Face ask you to consider what you would do given the tools at these doctors' disposal and make you squirm just the same. Only 2 spots left, and so many scary moments still to consider, which is, in itself, another scary moment for anybody that's ever written a movie list. But one more stop that we need to make is in the realm of the all-consuming scare. These are the moments that create terror or even just unease, and then they just make you stew in it. This is different from the slow burn or the existential scares in that these moments are still more self-contained. Moments that confront the viewer with a very specific feeling and force you to keep watching it. Most of Nosferatu lives in this world, especially when the vampire kills the 2 children. This is Get Out's sunken place sequence and the girls walking away in slow motion from Picnic at Hanging Rock while their friend still watches at sound speed. This is another category that non-horror movies see a lot of success in, because Barry Keoghan eating spaghetti and the killing of a sacred deer I find to be terrifying. Same for the later sequences in Mother. But the all-consuming scene I think of most often is the beach sequence in Under the Skin. Jonathan Glazer's version of E.T., Under the Skin, finds an alien abducting men for some type of study throughout Scotland. She finds herself on a beach, luring her next subject, a surfer, back to her van when a tragedy begins to unfold in the water further down the beach. A dog has ventured too far out into the waves, a woman trying to save it. Then a man tries to save her, followed by the surfer trying to save them both, only for all of them to fail, leaving a baby alone on the beach. It's an upsetting scene just to describe, but the true brilliance is in how it's shot. We can hear nothing over the powerful sounds of the waves. Glazer uses long lenses, leaving us detached from the proceedings, unable to connect or participate in the same way that Scarlett Johansson's alien female is incapable of empathy. The scene also sets up her journey for the rest of the film. It's an Act 1 break at which she begins to want something, to know what being human feels like. But to watch a family drown, to leave their infant stranded and alone, and to pull it off from such a detached perspective, for me, is the whole reason this movie is incredible, and the whole reason this moment is truly terrifying. As we arrive at our number one, we're fully on the other side of the spectrum from the jump scare with which we go. Snuck it back in there. For our last spot, I want to talk about something everybody has in common. Regardless of who you are, where you came from, or what you find scary, we're all going to die someday. It's the one universal fear there is, knowing that one day, for some reason, you'll just kind of stop. Movies that can pull off a scary moment built around the unknowable void that comes after death are fewer and farther between than other categories for sure. There are, of course, some great rug pull style twists that point in this direction, famously with The Others and The Sixth Sense. But Lars von Trier's super slow-mo overture at the beginning of Melancholia is more what we're looking for. A movie that stares the end of existence in the face. 2001: A Space Odyssey cosmically does the same thing with Bowman's life cycle, presenting an uncomfortable and, dare I say, kind of scary thread to pull on at the end of a mind-blowing bit of science fiction. But the movie I want to talk about is more recent, with a title that hints at the oldest scary moments in our storytelling history, the montage of time passing in 2017's A Ghost Story. What begins as a contained story about grief and a ghost watching his partner move on with her life shifts gears to the entire world moving on. About 2/3 of the way through the movie, David Lowery presents us with a montage of time passing from the perspective of this ghost. It's eerie, it is unsettling, it's magnificently edited to feel as though it's happening in real time. In the spot on which his house used to stand, a skyscraper is constructed in 2 straight minutes, and it all ends with a ghost deciding to jump off a building. Time itself is presented as impossibly huge in the montage. A sense of loneliness, of desperation, damnation even, accompanies this long-waiting ghost, and it's a terrifying thought. The technique Lowery, who edited the film as well, uses to jump us through time the same way in which the ghost perceives it is used throughout the film, but it never feels like much more than a clever assembling of the story, until this montage. This moment makes the story about more than one dead man's experience as his spirit lingers. This is a movie about memory and legacy and their microscopic significance set against eternity itself, and nowhere is that driven home more than the montage of a fraction of that eternity passing, which, for my money, makes it one of the scariest movie moments of all time. Well, what do you think? Did I leave out some of your favorite scary movie moments? Was this too much information about what I personally find scary and this was actually kind of an embarrassing experience for me? Let me know about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe for more CineFix movie lists.